On January 13, 1982, a bitter cold gripped Washington, D.C. as a snowstorm blanketed the region, causing disruptions throughout the city. Roads were jammed, visibility was reduced, and the Potomac River had developed a crust of ice over its surface. Amid this chaos, Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737-222, sat on the icy tarmac at Washington National Airport, preparing for its journey to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The aircraft, tail number N62AF, was relatively new, having been delivered to Air Florida only a few years earlier, and the crew operating the flight that day had several years of experience between them. The captain, Larry Wheaton, was 34 years old with more than 8,000 flight hours, while the first officer, Roger Pettit, was 31 years old with about 3,000 flight hours. Flight 90 was scheduled to depart at 2:15 p.m., but due to severe weather conditions and heavy snow accumulation on the ground and aircraft, it was significantly delayed. De-icing procedures were carried out on the plane before pushback, with crews applying a combination of glycol and hot water to remove the snow and ice. However, after de-icing, the aircraft sat on the tarmac for an extended period while waiting for taxi clearance. During this wait, snow continued to fall, and the ambient temperature hovered around 24 degrees Celsius, which was cold enough for ice to reform on the aircraft's critical surfaces, particularly the wings and the engine inlets. The aircraft was not equipped with an anti-icing system on the wings that could be used on the ground, and the flight crew did not request a second de-icing treatment, a decision that would later be scrutinized intensely during the investigation. As the aircraft waited in line for takeoff, the crew engaged in conversations that touched on a number of topics, some of which were later criticized by investigators as potentially distracting. Most crucially, they expressed concern about the amount of snow and ice on the aircraft and the apparent lack of engine power compared to normal parameters. Despite this, they elected to proceed with takeoff. At approximately 4:01 p.m., Flight 90 was cleared for takeoff on runway 36. As the aircraft rolled down the runway, the engines failed to achieve the usual level of thrust, something both pilots noticed. The first officer remarked on the sluggish performance, while the captain seemed to be wrestling with conflicting information. During the takeoff roll, the aircraft appeared to struggle to gain speed. Nevertheless, the aircraft lifted off the ground, but almost immediately began to exhibit signs of distress. The control yoke vibrated with the unmistakable signal of a stall warning, the stick shaker, and the aircraft struggled to climb, barely reaching an altitude of about 350 feet. Witnesses on the ground and air traffic controllers saw the aircraft fly low and erratically over the river, trailing a steep, nose-high attitude that indicated it was close to stalling. Just seconds after liftoff, the aircraft struck the 14th Street Bridge, which was packed with vehicles due to the evening rush hour. The right wing clipped several cars and a truck, sending debris scattering across the icy bridge. The aircraft's fuselage then slammed into the frozen Potomac River, breaking apart on impact. Of the 79 people aboard the aircraft, only 5 survived the crash. 4 motorists on the bridge were also killed, bringing the total death toll to 78. Rescue operations were immediately hampered by the weather and ice-choked river. Helicopters from the U.S. Park Police and other agencies arrived quickly, but access to the victims was extremely difficult. In a scene that would later become iconic and emblematic of both tragedy and heroism, a bystander and several first responders witnessed a lone survivor in the water, later identified as Arland D. Williams, Jr., who repeatedly passed the rescue line to other victims instead of using it himself. He helped save several people, but eventually succumbed to the cold and drowned before he could be rescued. His selflessness became a symbol of sacrifice and heroism in the face of disaster. The wreckage of the aircraft sank quickly beneath the ice-covered river, making recovery efforts exceptionally difficult. Divers worked in frigid water and against the clock, attempting to retrieve bodies and parts of the fuselage. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, launched a full investigation into the incident. When investigators began analyzing the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, they discovered a chilling sequence of events. The CVR captured the confusion and concern of the crew during takeoff, including statements suggesting they were aware something was wrong, but failed to act decisively. A critical aspect of the investigation focused on the aircraft's engines. It was determined that the engine pressure ratio, EPR, sensors were likely obstructed by ice, which meant the thrust indicators in the cockpit were giving false readings. The flight crew believed they had sufficient power for takeoff, when, in fact, the engines were producing significantly less thrust than required. Furthermore, the aircraft's wings were contaminated with ice, which disrupted the airflow and significantly degraded lift. This combination proved fatal. Insufficient thrust, combined with reduced lift, made it impossible for the aircraft to climb safely. The NTSB's final report cited the flight crew's failure to use the correct procedures for de-icing and anti-icing as the probable cause of the accident. They failed to re-dice after a lengthy wait and did not visually inspect the wings before takeoff, nor did they taxi with the engine anti-ice system on. Their misreading of the thrust indicators and reliance on faulty instruments further compounded the problem. Contributing to the accident were the adverse weather conditions, lack of adequate training for cold weather operations, and Air Florida's limited experience with operating in such environments. Public reaction to the crash was intense. It came at a time when the United States was dealing with an economic downturn and a national conversation about infrastructure, safety, and preparedness. The images of the rescue, particularly the bravery of Arland Williams and the dramatic helicopter rescue efforts, captured national attention. The bridge where the aircraft struck was later renamed the Arland D. Williams Jr. Memorial Bridge in his honor. The crash prompted major changes in airline procedures and regulations, particularly regarding cold weather operations. The FAA mandated stricter de-icing protocols, enhanced crew training for winter conditions, and improvements in engine instrumentation. Air Florida, a low-cost airline that had been growing rapidly in the deregulated airline market, never recovered. From the blow to its reputation, it filed for bankruptcy just a few years later. The crash of Flight 90 served as a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of aviation and the importance of strict adherence to safety procedures, particularly in challenging weather conditions. For the families of the victims, the crash left a permanent scar. Many felt the deaths were preventable and that human error and oversight had turned a routine flight into a national tragedy. Survivors carried emotional and physical scars, haunted by the memory of being trapped in the icy water, seeing fellow passengers drown or succumb to hypothermia. The legacy of Flight 90 is multifaceted. It includes sorrow and anger over the loss of life, admiration for acts of heroism, and significant improvements in aviation safety. It became the subject of documentaries, books, and news retrospectives, all attempting to understand how such a catastrophe could occur. The haunting image of the tail of the aircraft jutting from the ice-covered river remains one of the most enduring from that day. For Washington, D.C., the crash was one of the darkest moments in its modern history, compounded by the simultaneous crash of a metro train that same day, adding to the sense of chaos and helplessness. Thanks for watching. Share this video to keep the memory alive, and subscribe so you never miss another story.